Well, good evening, and on the one hand, I'm very excited to be here, this wonderful occasion in which students, young people, are running the show for once, and on the other hand, I'm sorry that I am only able to share my thoughts with you in a foreign language, which is foreign to all of us, but I hope we can communicate. The word that appears up there says neme, and I'm going to share with you a few thoughts about memory, and a few thoughts about the ways in which we collect, document, recognize, study, analyze. One of the approaches to the study of memory is called oral history. Oral history consists basically in a practice of field work. You go out with a tape recorder or with a digital recorder today, and you ask people, just common people, everyday people, to tell you about the ways in which their lives interjected history. So basically there are three key words to this conversation. Memory, the relationship between the past and the present. Biography, the relationship between individual lives and social, collective, public history. And dialogue, the conversation between the person that is being interviewed and the person that is interviewing her or him. I will start with memory. I'm not a historian. I used to be a teacher of American literature. And one of the great American writers, William Faulkner, has a famous phrase in which he says, "The past was not dead. It wasn't even past." So memory is exactly this. The fact that the past does not just belong to the past, but the past is a presence in our time. I don't know how many of you are Bruce Springsteen fans, but a song like The Ghost of Tom Joad means exactly this. It's a metaphor of how the history of the past is present and acts in our time. So, because basically when you do an interview, you can do an interview on an event that took place in 1944, but if the interview is done in 2023, then it's a document about 44, but it's a document of 2023, and it tells you what 44 means in 23. Because the way we remember, the way we conceptualize, the way we imagine the past has an impact on the way in which we act in the present. An example, one of the historical events that I studied was a massacre, a mass murder perpetrated by the Nazi occupiers in Rome in 1944, in which they killed 335 civilians as to terrify the city and show the city that the price for resistance was very high. So the memory of this massacre has been sort of an official memory in a country that claimed that our democracy was based on the history of anti-fascist and anti-Nazi resistance. All patriotic memories, it sort of became ritual. Of course, we all cared for this, but okay, we know. Suddenly the memory changes meaning. And it changes meaning because now we have an avowed fascist who is the Prime Minister of Italy. So the memories of anti-fascism, which were sort of an official memory until 1995, become an oppositional memory today. And the presence today of anti-fascist memory is a powerful force in the political scene in contemporary Italy. So this is the meaning of the phrase, the past is not even past. The past is active today. The second keyword is biography. I come from in high school, the high school that I went to was called a classical high school. One of the key subjects was classical Greek, which I barely remember, but I can't help noticing that half the words I'm using come from Greek. So biography. The history that we read in books, or at least the history we used to read in books, was not the history of common people. It was kings, generals, battles, huge events. However, all of these huge events have an impact on individual lives. And on the one hand, I mean, you can't have a war without common soldiers. You can't have a war that does not affect individual lives. An old lady, a textile worker in the town of Terni, where I grew up, used to tell me, you know, World War I was fought up in the mountains. World War II, it was fought right here because they were bombed. So we were also involved, she says. And one of the things that we do in this approach, in this oral history method, is how people have been involved. So take the massacre that I was talking about. Okay, they killed 335 men. The victims came from all walks of life: peddlers, generals, young, old, Jews, Gentiles, atheists, communists, Christian Democrats, liberals. The only thing they had in common was that they were all men. This means that those who were in charge of survival, like feeding the children, and memory are mainly women. So this is a history of women. Even though in history books it's a story of men, Nazis, Nazi soldiers, killing men. But in memory, it's a history of women. Women trying to survive after the massacre. And survival was something, they've never been asked about this. So, because of course, you know, we learned that the historical event is what happened to, I'm talking about this one example, this lady whose husband was killed. And to her, the historical event is the death of her husband. To me, the historical event in oral history is how did she live after that? And she has an incredible story because she talks about, you know, she didn't even know I was recording because she didn't think this was official, this was history. And she talks about how hard it was for her to get a pension after the massacre. This was not a historical event for her. And then she says, and in order to get that pension, I had to make the rounds of offices and institutions and places, and everybody thought that I was at their disposal. So I said, see, dialogue, Madam, what do you mean? And she says, I mean what you know I mean. She means that she didn't even, she was an old lady, she had only gone to the 3rd grade in school, no education. She didn't have the words to say sexual harassment, but she had the experience. And she did not know then that her experience of sexual harassment was a historical event, because she had never been taught that there's such a thing as women's history, as social history, as the history of sexuality. And one thing that story did for me was it made me ashamed. Because as long as we're talking about the Nazis massacring all these men, I'm not a Nazi, I'm anti-Nazi, so it has nothing to do with me. Apparently, it does. Because the Nazis were European, Western Europeans just like me. came from my own culture. But when she talks about men thinking that young widows were legitimate prey, then she's talking about me. Not because that's what I think, but because that's a culture, that's a male culture in which many of us were raised. So this takes us to the third example, to the third question, dialogue. I used to teach African American literature, but one of the first interviews that I did with an African American lady in Kentucky, in the United States, she says, she talked in circles. She began by giving me the commonplace things, we're all against racism, blacks and whites together. And then she raised the stakes, and she started talking about more difficult things. At one point she says, my great-grandparents were slaves. Incidentally, she had a hard time uttering the word slaves. They were slaves, which, when you're talking about oral history, the oral is crucial. Her relationship with the memory of slavery was all concentrated in the fact that she couldn't even say that word. And then she says, and they told us stories that went down through the family, and because of what I've been told, no white person has ever done anything to me, but because you're white, I don't trust you. And the question was, see, in an interview, an exchange of gazes, you look at each other, the question is not just who is this person I'm talking to. The question is also who am I? Because you're facing difference, you're facing otherness, and you're implicitly redefining yourself. So here I am, white male, European, middle class, talking to a black woman, working class American, plus religious differences and everything. Why should she trust me? Meaning that we have so much in common, but one difference, one of the basic difference we don't have in common is the color of our skin. And I may be or think I am anti-racist and everything, but the moment the color of our skins becomes a matter of life and death, can she trust me? Or can I trust myself? Because I've never been in that situation. Can I trust myself? So she was challenging me. And this is so important in the work of oral history, because you're having a dialogue with otherness. And one of the thoughts that I had that day was, well, okay, say this was 1938, and suddenly all the Jewish kids in my class disappeared, because that's what happened in 1938 in Italy. Would I do something? Would I think something? Or would I just be indifferent, or would I keep quiet? I don't know. I don't know. So this is what facing otherness in the course of fieldwork does for you. And she says, this lady, my grandmother always told us, no matter how good they look, no matter how good they talk, white people, there's always going to be a line. And I wondered, okay, she says she can trust me, but she's spending 2 hours of her life to talk to me. And then we did another interview, another 4 hours. So why? Basically because she trusted me enough to try to spend some time in her life to explain to me why she couldn't trust me. And there's always going to be a line. What she was doing, she was talking across that line. I was on one side, she was on the other side, and she was talking. And I was reminded of what I learned in school. How do you say talking across? Dialogue, dialogos. The real meaning of dialogue is exactly this: the exchange, the sharing of thoughts across a line of difference. So this is really what oral history is about. We cross a number of boundaries, the boundary between the present and the past, the boundary between individual life and capital H history, the boundary between ourselves and otherness. And we learn a lot of history, but we learn a great deal about ourselves. Because I've always felt that if you come out of one of these interviews and you're not changed, well, you have been wasting your time. And I honestly hope that I haven't been wasting yours. Thank you for your patience.